Hello, students. It's Mr. Lee, and I'm sharing another writing tools video for my Gwinnett Tech English 1101 students. This particular video will focus on a few housekeeping rules. These are just like little rules that are important for you to know, especially as you're finishing up your final drafts for essay number one. I wanted to make sure that you know these rules so that you don't have these errors on your final drafts. But then we're also going to talk about commas and in particular about commas and quotation marks. So let's go ahead and jump in uh, for this video for today. Okay, the first of four little housekeeping rules before we get to commas is about titles. So with your reading responses and your essay one, you're referring to titles of books, titles of essays, titles of chapters, some of the titles of episodes from TV shows. So big containers are the ones that are italicized, and those are the titles of movies, TV shows, or TV series, books, or magazines. And they're considered bigger containers because within those they have smaller portions. Now, movies don't necessarily have chapters or episodes, but they are considered a long format media, so they're considered a big container. But the title of a TV series or TV shows, those TV shows are broken up into episodes, or books are broken up into chapters, or magazines are filled with articles. So the titles of the bigger containers are italicized, but the smaller elements within those are put in quotation marks. So the titles of the smaller elements within are put in quotation marks. So the easiest way to look at this and understand this is to look at examples. So the first example we have says, "So Long Farewell was the best episode of the show Ted Lasso." So in this sentence, "So Long Farewell" is the title of an episode within a TV series or TV show called Ted Lasso. So the title of the TV show is put in italics, as you see, Ted Lasso in italics. And the title of the episode is put in quotation marks, as you see there, "So Long Farewell." All right. The next example is from a book, the chapter title in a book. And so it reads, "The last chapter of The President's Secret is called I Remember." So here, the title of the book is The President's Secret, so that's put in italics. And the title of the chapter is I Remember, so that's put in quotation marks. In your reading responses from the textbook, you're supposed to put the titles of those essays that you're reading in quotation marks. But if you're reading from a longer book or referring to the title of the textbook, then you would put that in italics. For essay number one, if you're referring to a movie or a TV series, you would put that title in italics. And anything like if you're talking about an episode or a chapter within a book to talk about the development of the character, you would put those titles of the smaller elements in quotation marks. All right, let's move on to the second idea, big idea in this housekeeping section, numbers. So generally, if you're talking about numbers, numbers under 20 are written out using the word format, like 17 and 2. But for 20 and higher, then you can use the numeric representation. You can write the number. If you're writing 20, 21, if you're saying, hey, that character was 36 years old, you can write the number 36. You don't have to spell it out with the words. If you're talking about how there are, 432 people in the TV show, then again, you would write that as a number. Okay, so that's how we handle numbers in MLA formatting. Next, we want to talk about formal versus informal writing. Just a few little things. In formal writing, we generally avoid contractions like can't, don't, I'm, and others. We also avoid slang terms like cool or over the top. So when it comes to contractions, we are seeing more and more contractions in writing, particularly essay writing, opinion writing, or fictional writing. You see this in some of the essays in your textbook, some of the essays that we've done reading responses for even, you'll see that there are some contractions that are used. A contraction is an abbreviation to shorten form. And there are times when that can be helpful and appropriate, but it doesn't look as formal, it doesn't look as polished, and sometimes it can even be less clear, or it can make it sound like street language. The comparison that we've encountered in our textbook is how when you look at the actual text in the textbook, in the teaching lessons, you never see contractions. You only see it in a few of the essays that are contained in the textbook. And so that's again where it affirms that in formal writing, we avoid contractions. So I'm not going to count off if you put that in your essay, especially in a section where you're talking about your opinion, you're giving your opinion on a character. But generally speaking, it's a good idea to get in the habit of avoiding contractions, especially when you're writing like a formal proposal at a workplace or a contract. You don't use contractions in contracts whatsoever. So keep that in mind, and you can practice that habit of getting contractions out of your writing. Slang terms like cool, over the top as well can be misunderstood. Sometimes your readers are not coming from the same culture or subculture, so they may not understand exactly what it is that you mean. Now, I end up teaching English to a lot of people who are coming from other countries. So there are plenty of expressions or idioms or figures of speech that they don't know because they didn't grow up in the US like I did, and they don't know all the references to those idioms or figures of speech. So when you're writing in formal writing settings, generally you want to avoid that. You want to be as clear as possible by just speaking plainly or writing plainly. And then finally, in this little housekeeping section, when you're referring to people using their names, usually you would use their full name. And then after that, for real people, you would use their last name only to refer to them after you use the full name the first time. For fictional characters, you introduce them by using their full name if it's available. And then after that, it's okay to use their first name to refer to them. Okay, so real name, for real people, using their last name shows respect. For fictional characters, because it's not a real person, you're not worried about showing respect to that person, so you can use their first name. Now, the only time when, for real people, you would use their first name, or you might use their full name, is when there's an ambiguity. Okay, so let's say you're talking about um, directors, and you're talking about Francis Ford Coppola, and then you're talking about Sofia Coppola. So father and daughter. So if you're talking about them in the same article, obviously you can't just use the word Coppola to refer to each of them, because then you'll be confused as to which one you're talking about. You're talking about the father, you're talking about the daughter. So you would introduce each of them using their full name, and then after that, you might refer to them still using their full name, or you might occasionally refer to them using the first name just to differentiate. But generally speaking, you want to use as respectful a term as you can, and often that's the full name, or sometimes it's just their last name. So let's take a look at a few examples. First one is Stanley Kubrick. Kubrick is famous. Kubrick has directed many films, so Stanley Kubrick is a real person, famous director, and so we introduce him using his full name the first time, and then after that, just use the last name. And then the second example, Harry Potter was young, fictional character, and then after that, Harry, using the first name, Harry fought bravely. This has come up in your reading responses. Some of you, when you're referring to the authors of those essays that we've read, you've been using their first names, and that is not respectful. So you make sure you use their last name. And this will come up for some of you in essay 1 when you're referring to the creators of a character or the authors or directors involved in producing the media that contains those characters. So you want to refer to them using their last names after you use their first full name for the first time to introduce those persons. All right, if you have any questions about those, you can ask. Let's move on to commas. When do we use commas? There are a lot of rules in the English language for comma usage, and this is one of the hardest things. So this is the first of 2 weeks when we'll look at commas. But just to lay down some basic rules, some of these you kind of picked up, but maybe you haven't heard them expressed in this way, in such a formal way. And it's important to understand that there are rules, and even though in English there are a lot of exceptions to rules, but there are some basic rules that govern how we use commas. But a lot of them have common sense reasons, and I'll explain these as we go along. So here are a few rules for when and where to use commas and how to use commas. Number 1, to separate introductory phrases or clauses with more than 3 words. And all of that is because when you're writing a sentence or you're speaking, but let's say you're writing a sentence, and if you have a long introductory phrase before you get to the main part of the sentence, then you want to put a comma there so that your reader knows, oh, that was just the introduction part of the sentence. Now let's get to the main part of the sentence. So here's an example. In the left lane, comma, cars tend to go faster. So this is more than 3 words. It's an introductory phrase. In this case, it's a prepositional phrase, a preposition being in. So that tells us the location or where something is happening. So in the left lane, comma, cars tend to go faster. So here's an example where we put that comma after the introductory phrase because now it cues a reader to let them know when you're about to say the main part of your sentence. So it's like, hey, that was just the introduction. Now pay attention to what I'm really wanting to say here. So in the left lane, cars tend to go faster. So that's how we use that comma to set off, to separate an introductory phrase or clause with more than 3 words. Okay. This comes up a lot. It's just one of the common ways that we write is we'll set up the main part of our sentence by introducing a detail. And so you want to set that off if it's longer than 3 words. The reason why we have the longer than 3 words rule is because when it's 3 words or fewer, then a lot of times the reader will figure it out. We do assume that our readers are able to figure some things out, but we want to help them especially when sentences get really long, by using a punctuation. Okay, so that's the first one. Number 2, to separate a non-restrictive clause or phrase, and this is an unnecessary phrase or clause that adds details, but it's just us adding more things into the sentence because we want to, give more facts. So here's an example. There are a couple of examples here. The high school, built in 1980, is a strong academic school. Okay, so that insertion, that phrase that's there and added in as an additional detail, is actually not necessary to the meaning of the sentence. You can leave it out. The sentence could be, the high school is a strong academic school. Okay. When you add in that detail, built in 1980, well, it's a nice little fact, but it's not necessary to the meaning of the sentence. And it's not necessary for identifying which high school you're talking about. Okay. So the high school is a strong academic school would be fine. The high school, comma, built in 1980, comma, is a strong academic school. Just adds more detail, but it's not necessary detail, and it's not restrictive phrase, meaning it doesn't really help you identify exactly which school you're talking about. But this second example is an example of a phrase that does restrict which one you're talking about. So here it's, that college without a football team is a small school. Okay. So the without a football team is the insertion. It's an added detail. But this is a detail that's actually important to the meaning of the sentence, and it's important to identifying which college you're talking about. So that college without a football team is different from saying that college. So that college without a football team actually is important for the full meaning of the sentence, because it helps you to understand why it's a small school, or that it's a small school, and here's another detail related to that. So we don't put commas around that because it's more of an important detail. It's more of a restrictive phrase that's added to identify which college you're talking about. So we don't put the commas in. So basically, in sum, it's, if you're adding a detail that's not that important, but it's just nice to have, bracket it with commas. But if you're adding a detail that seems very important to identifying the character or the topic, then you can try it without the commas. All right, next. Number 3, to separate 2 independent clauses when with a conjunction. Okay, so we talked about comma splices and run-on sentences earlier in the semester, and how when you have a run-on sentence, you're just jamming 2 complete sentences together, and your reader cannot take all that. It's a lot of information to process. They need more punctuation cues to help them to understand what you're saying. When you put a comma in, that's just called a comma splice. It's not enough to really define the relationship between those 2 complete sentences or 2 independent clauses. So we don't just put a comma, that would be comma splice. So we put a comma plus a conjunction, and that's one of the first times when we use a comma in combining sentences. Okay, so here's an example. Jimmy ate dinner, Kobe did not eat. Those are 2 independent clauses, 2 complete sentences, but we're joining them with the comma and the conjunction, the comma with the word but. So Jimmy ate dinner, comma, but Kobe did not eat. So that's an example of us using the comma plus conjunction to join together 2 independent clauses. Okay. There's no comma used if a dependent clause follows an independent clause. Okay. I don't think oh wait, I do have an example of that. So Kobe did not eat because he was sick. So we don't put a comma there because we have a dependent clause. Because he was sick is the dependent clause, and it follows the independent clause of the complete sentence. Kobe did not eat, and there's no comma there because it really does flow together as a complete thought when you put the 2 together. So don't separate those, don't interrupt those. Those are not 2 independent thoughts, they're related thoughts. So we don't put a comma there. Okay. Next one, to separate elements in a series. This came up when we talked about parallel structure. So when you have more than two items, then you have a comma plus a conjunction in the series, and you have commas for each of the before each of the or separating the items in the series. So he likes baseball, comma, basketball, comma, and fishing. Okay, and remember that comma before the conjunction is important, called the Oxford comma. Some people say you don't need it, but to be super clear, we add that comma in before the conjunction so you can see that there are three items in this series. Okay, now let's take a look at parallel structure with some phrases. These are verb phrases. She did homework, comma, ordered dinner, comma, and watched TV. So again, you put the commas in to separate the elements in the series, including the one before the conjunction. So note the parallel structure. The first example, you have three nouns. And the second example, you have three verb phrases. We talked about that last week. Okay. Number 5, with quotation marks for direct quotations. Okay, so when you're saying exactly what it is that someone said, or you're taking a quotation from a book or an article or a movie or a TV series or something like that, then you put a comma before the quotation marks or within the quotation marks if your tag is coming after that. So here's the example. Mark said, comma, space, open quotation mark, get out of here, exclamation point, closing quotation mark. Okay. So that comma is there to let the reader know, hey, this is exactly what he said. I'm going to quote directly here, and that comma helps you to cue the reader into that. Go home, comma, she said, comma, and get lots of rest tonight. So here the tag is interrupting the full quote. And so you set off that tag with two commas. So go home, comma. Notice that's inside the closing quotation mark for the first part of the quote. And then she said, comma, space, and then get lots of rest tonight. Notice the period at the end is inside the closing quotation mark. All right. Usually the commas and the periods go inside the quotation marks. Okay, but that's where we use commas to set off a direct quotation. All right. And got a few more, a couple more. Separating city, state, or date and year. These are ones that you know pretty well. She lives in Whistler, British Columbia, which is in Canada. Okay, now it's important to note that there's a comma between the city and the province, but there's also a comma after the name of the province, separating that from the last part of the sentence. So generally, that's how we do that when we're talking about places. We do put the comma in between city and state, and then you would also put a comma after the state. Okay. For a date, between the date and the year, you put a comma. Okay. So when you have the full date, March 15th, 2002, so month, day, and year, you put the comma in. But when you are writing that without the date or the year, you don't put the comma in. So March 15th is her birthday. Now, sometimes I'll see people insert a comma in between the name of the month and the day. So they'll put March, comma 15. That is incorrect. Okay. So it's only between the two numbers, March 15th, comma 2002. By the way, some people are writing the dates on your MLA documents in the European style where you put date, month, and then year. So you put 15 March 2002. You don't need any commas when you write it that way. Okay, no commas when you write it that way. Okay, it's only when you write it in the way that we do here in the US usually, which is month, day, and year. You put the comma in to separate the two numbers. Okay. Another example, May 2024 will be a busy month. Okay, that's without the actual day. So there are not two numbers, so you leave the comma out. All right, finally, number 7, I think this is our last one for this week. Separating adjectives without and. So if you're jamming two adjectives together to describe someone or something, and you could use the word and, but you decide to leave the word and out, then you can put those together with a comma. So Jamisha is a trustworthy, hardworking employee. You could say Jamisha is a trustworthy and hardworking employee, but you're just going for brevity, so you put the comma in. And that's how you can use a comma when putting two adjectives together. Okay. You don't use the comma when the and doesn't fit. So that's an expensive brown bag. So let's test that. You wouldn't say that's an expensive and brown bag. That sounds awkward in the English language. So in that case, you don't put a comma. All right. There's a whole methodology and philosophy to how we place adjectives in connection to one another. Like when you put the number, the color, the size, and all that. I'm not going to break that down for you guys. Somebody has done that. You can look that up on YouTube or on the internet for how we sort our adjectives in the English language. All right, there's one other slide I want to share today, and that's using semicolons. We use semicolons to connect two related independent clauses. So again, this is how we fix run-on sentences or comma splices. I gave you guys three options for how to fix that. You can either write two separate sentences, you can use a comma plus a conjunction, or the third solution for that is to use a semicolon. So here's an example. The speaker was female, semicolon. Many speakers from that school are female. You could use a comma and a conjunction there, but it's probably not as effective. So this is where a semicolon would make sense. All right. And then finally, it can be used to take the place of a comma. A semicolon can be used to take the place of a comma or used to take the place of a comma to help with clarity. So for example, here is a long parallel structure. And because each of the elements in the structure has descriptive phrases attached, then we use the semicolons to separate the items in this series. Okay, the gathered crowd included diplomats, many from developing nations, semicolon, celebrities, especially those with philanthropic interests, semicolon, and business leaders whose connections span the globe. So that's an example of using semicolons in the place of commas, where commas would usually separate the items in a series because there are already commas. Then that would be confusing. So we use semicolons there. All right. So to review, here are some examples. Which is correct? Greg said, I haven't eaten fast food in a year. So which one is correct? They all say the same thing, but which one has the correct use of commas? In this case, commas and quotation marks. Right. So here, remember, if it's a direct quote, we put the comma in along with the quotation marks. So here, we're assuming this is a direct quotation. So we would put the comma in with the quotation marks. So the correct answer here would be A. Greg said, comma, I haven't eaten fast food in a year. All right, number two. My mother said that nothing good happens after 2 a.m. So which one of these is correct? All right. So again, the question is this a direct quote? Nothing good happens after 2 a.m. That sounds like a direct quote. I mean, maybe some of your mothers have said this. I think my mom has said something like this. I'm pretty sure my wife has said something like this to my kids. Actually, so have I. So the correct answer here would be C, because it is a direct quote. So use the comma plus the quotation marks. All right, number three. I told you that I don't like pepperoni pizza. Okay. All right, so all three of these have that word that. So what do you think is the correct answer here? All right, for this one, we're going to assume it's not a direct quotation. It doesn't need to be. It's just somebody reiterating a fact of something that had been said earlier. So because it's not a direct quotation, and we use the word that to indicate it's not a direct quotation, it's just relaying a fact. And so here we don't put the comma, and we don't put the comma plus the quotation marks. So the correct answer here is B. I told you that I don't like pepperoni pizza. The comma is not needed when it's not a direct quotation. Okay. Number four, which is correct. I plan to graduate in May 2020. Okay, remember we said that when it's the full date, written in the way that we generally write it in America, which is month, day, and year, we use the comma just to separate the two numbers. And in this case, there are not two numbers. So we don't need a comma at all. So here the correct answer is A. There's no day with the year. There's not two numbers, so we don't need the comma to separate them. All right, number 5, which is correct? The sweet, spicy chicken was the best I ever tasted. Okay, remember we said that when we're putting together two adjectives, you test it by asking, can I put the word and in between the two adjectives? If I can, but then I'm leaving it out, then I'll put the comma in. So is it the sweet and spicy chicken was the best I ever tasted? Or is it the sweet spicy chicken? Okay, that sounds weird. I think it's the sweet and spicy chicken that sounds better. And so because we're leaving the and out, we put the comma in. So here, the correct answer is A. And I think I got two more, which is correct. I want to write my paper on cyberbullying or homelessness. All right. Well, so here it looks like there's two items in a series, but it's only two items in a series. And so because it's only two items and not three or more, you don't need the comma at all. So even though there's a conjunction, you can leave the comma out. And so it's B. I want to write my paper on cyberbullying or homelessness. If there were three items, then we would put the commas in to separate the three items. All right. And finally, which is correct? In conclusion, my proposal for the project would be the best. We actually didn't really talk about this one. This is an introductory phrase, but it's one of the phrases where it's actually common to use a comma. So here the correct answer would be A, even though it's an exception to the rule. It's fewer than 4 words, 3 or fewer words. So generally you would think you don't need a comma, but this is just one of those phrases where it oftentimes has the comma with it. Okay, so the correct answer here is A. All right, you can check the Purdue Online Writing Lab website for more information on comma usage. They have a really helpful page that really breaks down a lot of these. We'll cover more in the future, in a future lesson. I know it's a lot to process, which is why I like doing this in this video format, because then you can go back and check it when you want. But other than that, if you have any questions, again, just go ahead and shoot me an email. You can also look online for other resources and even other YouTube videos from other instructors, other teachers who may be able to communicate these rules to you in a different way that could be effective as well. So thanks guys for watching, and hope you do well on your writing, your final drafts, and I will see you soon.